we go. You have the words of eternal life. Hallelujah.
The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 5th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak, and he taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. So today we begin what will become a 4-week series going through the Sermon on the Mount, as it is called. Jesus' first public discourse in the Gospel of Matthew. It's a sermon about discipleship, about who the disciples are and what they are called to do and what their rewards will be. This discourse covers several chapters of Matthew, and it takes place while Jesus sits on a mountain and his disciples come to him. But by the end of the Sermon on the Mount, it's clear that more and more than just his small band of disciples have come to listen. What Jesus says in this sermon is profoundly important, but it must be read in light of what we heard from him last week. If you remember, last week, Jesus began his public ministry, and he begins by proclaiming, Repent and believe, for the empire of God has come near. And then he goes out, he calls disciples, and he begins healing and teaching and preaching. What Jesus said last week was profoundly political, for who can say the empire of God has come near while standing in the midst under the oppression of the empire of Rome? And the political nature of Jesus' sermons don't stop with that one mission statement or thesis statement of his work. It continues throughout this Sermon on the Mount. It's perhaps no more obvious in these Beatitudes than the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. What Jesus says is political. It's against the way things are in the empire, in the Roman Empire, and for the way things should be and will be in God's empire. What Jesus says is countercultural and most of the time makes no sense to the ways of the world. Think about when you have heard someone say, "Oh, I am so blessed." Or maybe you yourself have said it. I know I have. I've been so blessed. What are you usually talking about? Isn't it usually about things that you have? Whether it's material possessions or the love of family and friends or escaping some sort of disaster, big or small, personal or communal. I'm so blessed. We are so blessed. But that's not the kind of blessing that Jesus talks about here. Jesus turns to his disciples and he starts out by saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, the hopeless, the lost, those who feel abandoned by God, who have lost their faith. Blessed are they. Blessed are the meek, he says. Those who are humble, those who stand back, those who are so frequently ignored by the world around them and pushed into the shadows. Blessed are they. Blessed are those who mourn. Those who in fact have exactly the opposite of what we usually consider being blessed. They've lost all or some of what we consider our blessings. Blessed are they. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Those who so deeply desire justice and righteousness in the world that when they see how unjust and unrighteous things are, they feel physical pain. They long to see God's work done. Blessed are they. Blessed, Jesus says, are the merciful. The ones who don't take things to the full extent of the law, but in fact forgive. Those who work rather for reconciliation than punishment. Those who work against the way that we usually see things play out. Blessed are they, says Jesus. Blessed are the pure in heart. Later, Jesus will talk about the importance of welcoming children and of having faith like a child, like one who is pure in heart. But so frequently we look at people who are pure in heart and we say, "You're naive. You're too ideological. That's not the way things work. You don't see how it is." But Jesus says, they see God. Blessed are they. Blessed are the peacemakers, not the victors of war, not the ones who come back to great celebration, but those who are frequently caught in the crossfire. Those who work to reconcile groups, not with some sort of surface, false pretense of peace, but true, lasting peace. Those who often are killed in the attempt to bring reconciliation on earth. Blessed are they. And as ridiculous as all of those things sound, then Jesus gets more ridiculous. Blessed are those who are persecuted. Really? Blessed are those who are persecuted? Blessed are people of color in our nation who are convicted and jailed more often and for longer periods of time than those of us who are white? Blessed are people in the LGBTQ community who are persecuted for who they are, who have their rights taken away from them, who are killed because they love. Blessed are immigrants who are seen as less than the rest of us because they don't know the language or the culture or the right way to live, who are shoved aside and pushed out and kept out, even when all they seek is sanctuary. But Jesus says, blessed are they. And then he changes things a little bit. He turns to the crowd, to whom he has been speaking this whole time, but he's been speaking about those people, the ones who mourn, the ones who are pure in heart, those peacemakers. He's been talking about them. Now, the reality is that there's probably a lot of those kinds of people in the crowd. But now Jesus says, blessed are you. Not because of what you have. Blessed are you when people speak evil of you, when people revile you, when people tell lies about you and curse you. Then you're blessed. In fact, he says, rejoice. Be glad when these things are happening to you. Because this is what has been happening to the prophets, to the people of God since the beginning of time. Blessed are you when you are reviled and hated, when people speak evil of you, when people hate you for doing God's things. You are blessed in that moment. What Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, and especially here in the Beatitudes, makes no sense. This isn't blessing. This isn't what blessings look like to us. But just as he turned upside down the idea of what empire means by saying the empire of God is near and then lifting up the lowly, so too he turns upside down our idea of what blessing means. Because blessing means being loved and seen and cared for by the God of all things. And truly, that is blessing. But what Jesus says so frequently makes no sense. And so maybe it would help us a little bit to look at our lesson from 1 Corinthians, where Paul explains why what Jesus says seems so strange. Paul says that the wisdom of God looks foolish to humans, but that God's foolishness is wiser than the wisest human thing that we could ever come up with could be. The message of the cross, Paul says, is foolishness. It's foolishness to follow someone who was poor, who was downtrodden, who was hung on a cross by the empire for what he says. It makes no sense to follow someone who is killed. But we do, because we know the end of the story. And that's when it starts to get less foolish. For what is the end of the story except that the one who came, who preached, who healed, who taught, and who died rises again. And in so doing, invites all of us into eternal communion with God. The message of the cross is foolishness. Preaching Christ crucified is foolishness. These blessings are foolishness, except that we know the whole story. And we know who's behind it. And we know that this is the God who turns to the meek and the mourning and the poor in spirit and the pure in heart, the merciful, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the persecuted, the peacemakers, and us, even when we are hated. Our God turns to us, lifts us up, and invites us. Invites us to be a part of the work of the kingdom, and invites us to be with God for all time. Invites us into resurrection and new life. God's wisdom, God's foolishness is wiser than any human wisdom. God's plan is greater than any of ours, and God's blessing is more than we could ever imagine. Blessed are you. Blessed are you. Amen.
Amen.